don't know about you, but I know a lot of people are having a huge crisis of trust in the medical industry, from personal experiences all the way through to some mass events that have happened. People don't know where to turn anymore. So I say, why don't we start turning to medical intuitives? I mean, if there's ever a time when their time has come to shine, it's right now. This is a perfect time in history to be talking to a really fabulous medical intuitive author and trainer of people in the medical profession. So without further ado, let's go to Wendie. Wendie, welcome.
Hi, Regina. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, I'd like to find out. Let's start so that people can get to know you a little bit. Everybody in this audience has heard of medical intuition. Some people have used medical intuitives, but a lot of people have not really given a lot of thought to all the ways in which medical intuitives can fill in the places that medicine can't. And we're talking about undiagnosable diseases that it seems a huge percentage of the population are coming up with. And in addition to that, even more vulnerable people who can't speak for themselves and everything in between. So let's start with your story. How did you originally decide to go into medical intuition? Because I know you were also doing energy healing, and often people that have one set of skills have the other. So tell us a little bit about your personal story.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Sort of starting from when I became an energy healer is a good place to start. I mean, if we go all the way back, I was an intuitive child, like many people are, and sort of learned to develop my intuition naturally over time in various ways. And not too surprisingly, later in life, I was attracted to energy work because it really does include the intuitive skill set. And I found that in my energy work, I was able to see into the physiology and the anatomy of the body as I was doing my work. And I was getting really powerful, you could call them hits, I guess, of information. One thing I noticed, Regina, was that sometimes my clients would really have great release experiences, and they'd come in for a healing and they'd leave feeling very shifted and, able to release things. And sometimes they couldn't. And sometimes issues would stick around and it was challenging for them. And I was curious to know why that was happening, right? Why is someone healing and someone else not healing? I'm using my skills the very same way. So I began noticing that the depth of information in these intuitive, hits or downloads or whatever you want to call it was really powerful. And I wondered if there was something in that information that I could parse out for them that might make a difference in whether or not they could heal. So I began developing what I call a medical intuitive assessment, which is not a healing session. It's actually a scan or a review of both the physical body and physiology issues, as well as life history and emotional, mental, spiritual issues, and impart that information and what would happen, right? Could that be useful for people? And I found that information was in many ways, actually in many very significant ways, more important than the healing itself, the healing work that I was doing itself, that information gave them essentially a roadmap to health and wellness that they were not getting from their medical doctors, even from their complementary alternative doctors or practitioners, that the medical intuitive assessment really was unique in that. And that's where I began creating this idea of medical intuition as an assessment, evaluation, a standalone process. And the more I did that work, the more I understood that it was a foundational skill, not a modality, but a foundational skill that could be applied to any modality. And that was exciting when I kind of realized that. And that's where I began thinking, I really need to teach people in the healthcare field how to do this, because it can beautifully support conventional as well
Absolutely.
As complementary. Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, years ago, I was having a problem. I'd been a vegetarian nearly 20 years, and I was having a lot of problems with my body at the time. And it was like everything was sort of shut, all my digestion, everything was shutting down. So I would drive by a Sizzler sizzler, cheap meat, billboard, and I'd start salivating. I thought, oh God, what's going on? I was so embarrassed, And so anyway, I finally had a meditation one morning, and I'm just bringing this up because this is where medicine intersected with it. I had a meditation. I saw that morning, you have to begin eating red meat. And I thought, no, I refuse. I won't do it. I will go to Dr. Bernard McGinnity, who was a well-known intuitive medical doctor in our city. And so I went to him and had a little checkup. He only told certain people about his ability to see. He said, what I'm being shown right now is you're going to need to eat some steaks 3 times a week for the next few weeks to start getting going again. And I thought, oh, rats, he's seeing it too. So anyway, that was my first experience with an MD who had this quality already developed. They had learned how to develop their intuition. Incredibly valuable, and it was the right ticket. So let's talk about you train doctors and nurses and ordinary people who have talents in this area or would like to. And also, you, in your book, you talk about some of the institutions that have begun embracing this. And that's what's exciting to me, is there actually is some headway being made. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing out there in mainstream medicine intersecting with this.
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you. And what a great story. And, I could talk for hours about, what you described in terms of what the body is asking for and what our own minds think is right. Yes. Sometimes it's quite a big split there. But I'm very, very honored to have presented and to be a presenter, a contributing educator for the Academy for Integrative Health and Medicine. I'm for the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. They have a program for fourth-year medical students and residents, which I've taught at. I've spoken at the University of Denver's Anschutz Medical Library in their lecture series. So more and more, we're finding integrative and functional medicine physicians and organizations are interested in what this whole idea of developing intuition means and how it can be applied in healthcare. That's really the key there.
Absolutely. So now looking at how some of these doctors have embraced it. I know you have some stories in your book. I read the book, and just some really deeply grateful and appreciative stories from doctors who took it upon themselves to learn how to do this and how much more they can help their clients now when normal diagnostics simply fail. And they fail a lot. They fail a lot, especially in these ubiquitous chronic diseases that seem to be everywhere. So I like stats. So I'm going to read a couple here that you talk about in your book. Okay. This one I loved. You had a study of 67 clients, and you had 5 practitioners that were working with these clients, as I understand it. And you can go ahead and get the numbers, or I can, but it was astounding the percentage of accuracy they had in these cases, which they knew nothing about. Why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I love stats too. I wish we had more. So this was a study that was done in San Diego with some of my colleagues down there, where we wanted to know the accuracy. But here's the thing. I'm going to back up a little, Regina, if you don't mind, to say there is not a lot of research done on medical intuition. In fact, when I went to look and research for the book, I found maybe a handful of studies. Right. There have been, over the years, there have been a lot of anecdotal stories. I mean, thousands of those, but not a lot of hard data, and all of it pretty much inconclusive, or promising, which is a really good thing. We want to see promising, information. When I looked at that some years ago, I thought, my graduates of my program are nailing it. We're getting, they fill out case reports. We do a lot of practicum hours, and we see that anecdotally, we're hitting our marks. So what does that mean? Can we quantify this? And so this little study was designed to just see what we could see. And what we found was, I'll give you a little background on it, since I know you like the research. There were 5 medical intuitive graduates of the program. There were 67 practice clients, actually participants from the community. Some of them were actually from UCSD Medical Center. Now, we didn't have access to their medical records, which is, what we want to continue forward with research on. But we did the study in the most blinded way we could. In other words, we don't do a health intake. We don't know what anybody comes in with. The medical intuitives have their eyes closed, so we don't have, visual cues or anything like that. What we found was that the participants rated the medical intuitives as 94% accurate in the evaluation and location of their primary health issue.
That's amazing.
That's a fabulous number. The doctors look at that and say, we don't even get that. We also had a 98% accuracy in the description of life history that could correlate with the health issue. And that's really phenomenal, because we want to know not just what's going on in the body, but why is it going on in the body? Is there anything in history that could have led to this? And we can talk about that even more in depth if you like. We also had a really fabulous piece of data. We asked the participants how many had a known medical diagnosis, how many had heard from their doctor, this is what you have. And of that group, which was about half of them, how consistent was the medical intuitive in describing, in correlating that diagnosis? In other words, describing it in such a way that they recognize the diagnosis, right? How consistent were they? And we got a 94% consistency.
That's
with
amazing.
That. Yeah, there were a lot of other stats in there that I wrote about in the book that were just as wonderful and exciting. And all of this led us to having it be published in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, which is a peer-reviewed medical journal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're very proud of that, because that represents the first known published data on medical intuition in about 20 to 25 years, just there it is. So we're going to build on that.
I love it. Okay. So, I wanted you to share that, because I was astounded when I read those stats myself. That's beyond what I would have expected to see. So this audience is super savvy. People understand, they've heard of medical intuition. Some people do it themselves, privately or even as a profession. And one of the things I'd like from you, because you also train people, so you see a lot of what's going on, even with your own clients, is what you're seeing now, because the world has shifted so dramatically over the last 2 to 3 years. With both COVID, whether we have received, whether we've been exposed to it naturally or have vaccines, we've got this little spike protein roaming around in the body and doing all sorts of things that seem to be really almost incalculable in the number of types of symptoms people have ended up with afterward, but also the isolation and depression, the kind of angst, even splitting apart of families and such that have occurred. What are you seeing now in terms of what kinds of new conditions or more common conditions are you seeing than you saw before all of this?
Oh my goodness. Respiratory and gut health are the two main things, but also nervous system, endocrine. It kind of, when you start to look at the body this way, you see the interactions and the connections. And so, it's not that, people are just having fatigue and long-term COVID, they call it, with a myriad of issues, cardiovascular issues, and on and on and on. But also the connections that the body makes that medical intuitives are trained to see. That's the difference between conventional medicine or even established complementary practices or alternative practices, because everybody's looking through their own lens.
Right.
And when you look through your own lens, you're going to miss the bigger picture. Medical intuition is designed to look at that 360, this system is connected to that system is connected to the other. And that's what makes it so valuable in terms of how to help people with these issues that are pretty rampant right now. I can tell you that most people that come through my practice have some kind of digestive issue going on.
That's interesting. Now, that's not what you'd throw into the normal kind of top 4 symptoms of COVID, but I've been hearing this from a lot of people. I myself have had these issues. What's going on? Why digestive issues after all of this?
Well, I think digestive issues have been going on forever.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just now. I do believe that, stress is a big part of it. We live in an incredibly stressful time, and it's just doesn't seem to be letting up. And that is if you relate it to the chakra system, that's a third chakra issue, a second chakra issue, emotions and self-expression. There's a lot of fear. And so when we talk about this, there's really no one way to say, well, it's got to be this or it's got to be that, because everybody's body assimilates things differently. Everybody's mind and spirit assimilates things differently.
Right. But you just said a lot of it right there. The preponderance of fear and anxiety and emotions tied into the third chakra. There you are. And so it seems that each person's being affected perhaps slightly differently, but that is ubiquitous. Those feelings have been ubiquitous globally, right?
Well, you add in, climate issues and, financial. I mean, the whole thing. We are living in interesting times,
Yes.
Regina. But, that really speaks to the fact that we have an obligation. If you think about it that way, we have an opportunity. Let's frame it that way, to develop a really powerful mind-body connection, intuitive mind-body connection. Everybody talks about that, but I got to ask, well, what does that mean to you? That means that, if I'm tired, I go take a nap. Well, that's good. Well, how about what your small intestine wants to tell you? What about what your liver has to say, having to do with toxicity levels? How
Right.
about what your shoulder wants you to know, etc. So there's a lot of ways to approach this that use the intuitive mind-body connection that can be very, very helpful for people just to mitigate stress, just to understand what's happening.
Right.
That understanding it speaks volumes. One of my favorite quotes I'll throw in here is by Dr. Dean Ornish. And his quote is, "Awareness is the first step in healing." I love that. That is the
So
motto.
simple and so true. I hope you're enjoying this video, because if you are, there are dozens more like it on my site, all supported by people like you. So if you'd like to keep this work rolling in and join our community, just click on the Patreon button at reginameredith.com. That also gives you access to insider commentary, my live book club, and other live events with special guests. So join in. Thanks. So because we're on the subject of, as you said, digestion issues being ubiquitous now, and they have been for a long time, I know, but perhaps even more so, it reminds me of a story in your book about a man named Robert. And I thought it would be good. We're not going to go into a lot of anecdotes because there are tens of thousands of them. We don't have time. But let's do this one because it really takes it back through the layers of the being and throughout their lifetime. So if you just kind of encapsulate the story of Robert and his digestive issues and what you learned in sessions with him.
Yeah, he was wonderful. Robert was a successful gentleman, in his late 30s or early 40s, and he was having a lot of trouble. In fact, the kind of digestive issues that doctors couldn't get a handle on. And he didn't know what to do. He came to me for a session. And the interesting thing about this story is not just what I saw for his body physically for digestive recommendations, because that was there. That's always there as part of medical intuition. As we ask the body what it wants, it shows us or tells us or gives us that information, and that's what we impart to the client. But where the issue came from for him was multifaceted, that life history piece, which is so fascinating to look at because we don't necessarily correlate that in our minds. So what I saw for him was for the origin of these issues for him in the present moment is that he was very, very close with his mother. And his mother had recently died, and she was in a foreign country when she died. And he was also experiencing some stress from work issues and projects that he was going on. So that was the present moment. When I looked into life history, I saw that at age 9, there was an incident from school. And that was something that he might have never even thought about again. But it was an incident where he was feeling very alone and very scared. And he was supposed to go on a trip with his classmates. And his stomach was acting up because there was a lot of stress there. And he was basically told, he was feeling like he should suppress his emotions, right? He couldn't feel what he was feeling. He would be embarrassed. His teachers might yell at him, whatever was happening. And in that moment, he made what became an unconscious kind of subconscious drive to man up. That was the message
he was just a little guy.
He was 9 years old, little kid. You man up. You can't talk about how you're afraid. He needed to run to the bathroom. His stomach was just bothering him. That was a very pivotal moment in his life because he made a conscious, aware idea kind of established itself. And that idea was that you don't talk about your emotions. You don't express your feelings. You keep it quiet. The next issue I saw, the next life experience I saw for him was he was 3 years old and his mother had come down with like a flu or something, but she had to be isolated from him. And that was the first time in his young life he'd ever been isolated from mother. And it was devastating for him. She was isolated for like 3 weeks or something. It was a heavy flu. This was in a foreign country. And, he just had this idea that, he was being abandoned and that abandonment caused another, I would say, unconscious or subconscious idea that established itself in his energy that, he was going to be abandoned or separated from somebody, that he had no control over it. This was really powerful for him in his life. Now, again, as adults, we think about, well, sure, maybe my mother got sick and she was, separated from me for 3 weeks. It probably didn't affect me at all. She was back. But really what happens is we have these moments in life that in the present moment get triggered by these early life experiences. Mm-hmm. And that's what was happening for Robert. Let me put the pieces together. In the present moment, when his mother died recently, he started experiencing gut dysbiosis. That's when it began. And yes, stress and yes, grief. But what about this life history that was also driving the show here? He was not in the same place with his mother, and he felt he had to be stoic and continue forward in life no matter what. Right. From that 9-year-old experience and 3-year-old experience, all of that together caused this really intense, in the moment, gut imbalance that was, unsolvable to medical health. Now, you think, well, okay, now that we know all this, what do we do with all this? Well, Robert's body had a lot of suggestions on how to adjust and, try different things he hadn't considered. And just hearing that validation of his own, the origin of his issues, the trajectory of it was so powerful for him. When we reconnected, he said that was the key in the lock that that opened the door to healing, because he'd been suffering with this for quite a while. He said that allowed me to start thinking about my health in a different way, to start thinking about my emotions in a different way. Maybe I shouldn't be so stoic. Maybe I shouldn't be repressing them. Maybe I need to grieve more. And he really began to take hold of his health. And because of that, it just was a really wonderful story to include because it had such an impact in his life.
Right. It's a wonderful story. You have several in there. And I'm thinking about the medical industry itself in that, as it says in the book, even doctors say we overprescribe, we send out for too many tests, and it's all for liability purposes. Everybody's trying to save their butt. And it's at the expense of the consumer. Or the patient, but we're really considered more consumers than patients, I think, in a lot of these larger situations, HMOs and such. And so here you have medical error as the third to fourth largest contributor to death in the United States, medical error. And this is an area, to me, it seems absolutely critical to have medical intuitives involved in. And you do have one story in there very briefly about a young girl who was having a little shard of something trying to move out. It turned out it was kidney stones, massive amount of pain. They couldn't find it. You saw it. She finally, when she was on opioids and everything because they didn't get it, Finally, they got it after your reading. She went in, they corrected it, but she was hooked on opioids and died of an overdose. How sad is that?
Oh, it's tragic. And I would imagine this kind of thing happens frequently. As you mentioned, the stats on medical error are shocking. The stats on the brokenness and the inefficiency or whatever for physicians and for patients, it's just the numbers are just ridiculous. And when a medical intuitive who knows what the value is looks at that, our feeling is this is just so unnecessary. It shouldn't be happening. And how do we shift that paradigm is the question.
Yes.
And
how do we shift it? I mean, okay, that's a bigger question. We might have to do another show on how we shift it, but I know you have some ideas and it's somewhat moving the right direction. Let's talk about some of those diseases that are often overlooked or misdiagnosed that are really common. Lyme disease is a big one. Fibromyalgia is a big one. Leaky gut. So many people suffering from leaky gut, and the medical industry really doesn't even test for that. So can we talk about that for a moment? Just these ubiquitous chronic diseases that are popping up that they seem to miss. It's not on their radar in the medical toolbox.
Yeah, it's endemic. I can give you a couple of answers for that. Probably the biggest picture answer for that is conventional medicine. I want to say around the turn of the century, 1900, took a very mechanistic view. They really switched from the idea of what used to be the old-fashioned word. It used to be called vitalism, meaning energy in the body of some kind. And it was really based so much in, I don't know if it was based in Eastern thought, but it was similar to Eastern thought, chi, prana, what health actually is, how energy moves in the body. Is there some non-physical element, all that sort of thing. And that was wonderful. And it actually really informed medicine for a long time. And what happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s with the development of the scientific method. Now, I don't have a problem with that. That was established all the way along, but it was decided that the scientific method was the only method, meaning empirical data had to be shown. And, I'm also a fan of data like you, and I think we need more studies, but they need to be devised in such a way that we can take into account the energetic. And that's a big part of the discussion right now with the rise of biofield practices, with the rise of intuition, the idea of intuition and how it can be used. We need studies that can allow this to be defined and quantified in a way that makes sense to the practice. It's a challenge, but to get back to your question, which of course now I've gotten off track with, so sorry.
My question had to do with the fact that these kind of ubiquitous things, there's no means for them to diagnose it in the medical industry. How else are we going to do it other than medical intuition, whether it be it our own or someone else's? How else?
Well, I agree with you. And I will also underscore that medical intuitives, unless they're licensed to diagnose, do not and should not diagnose or prescribe or prognose. What we do is we impart information. My client then takes that to their doctors. And one of the goals we have here is to inform their physicians about how this information was gathered. Now, some people are more comfortable talking about it with their doctors, but I can tell you there are very few medical intuitives that haven't gotten referrals from doctors. From the very beginning, I was getting referrals and calls from doctors. A group of medical intuitives have now established, myself included, an organization, a national organization, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But one of the things we wanted to know, and the surveys we sent out initially, was how many medical intuitives work with licensed healthcare practitioners. How many medical intuitives are referred by licensed healthcare practitioners? Here's what we found, Regina. 82% of the medical intuitives we surveyed, which were all professional, self-identified medical intuitives, said that they directly assist licensed healthcare providers with medical intuition. That is an astounding number that nobody has ever seen before. We also found that 86% of self-identified medical intuitives that we surveyed receive referrals for medical intuition for their patients and clients. And that didn't surprise me at all because that's very common. But that data has gone unnoticed. It actually has never been gathered that I'm aware of. And we have just, we submitted a paper on it to a medical journal. We're writing about it. We have a website established, if you don't mind me talking about that.
Yeah, please do. No,
Yeah.
go ahead and talk about it. So there's now a place where medical intuitives can gather.
Yes, the organization is called the National Organization for Medical Intuition, NOMI, and the website is NOMI, NOMImedicalintuition.org. And we encourage medical intuitives to go take a look. We just launched it less than 2 weeks ago, I think, and we'll be opening membership very soon. But get on our mailing list because we want to develop a strong community of professional medical intuitives. We want the healthcare industry to understand the value. We want to outreach. We want to develop avenues. So please do join us for that.
I love that. Let's go on to another group that has been underserved only because of their own vulnerability, and that is the notion of, for example, children, babies, people with dementia, people who have conditions and pain going on, and you can noticeably tell they're in pain, but they can't tell you what's going on. They can't explain it. Can you talk about that for a moment? Because it seems like if you have a young family, that's a good time to have a medical intuitive on board to be able to speak on behalf of the little kids, and maybe share a story or just tell us your thoughts on that.
My thoughts on that are many. I do work a lot with parents of minors, children. And that's really important because, kids don't necessarily know how to describe what's going on for them. I also have students, graduates of the program who are working with autistic children, with the parents of autistic kids. This is a whole field that really should be established because
yes, I was just going to ask you about that. Tell us about what they're finding.
They're able to connect intuitively with the autistic child. And first of all, I've encouraged all of my students to just document everything, please, because we need to have data about this. And if the parents are willing, obviously.
Right.
And if the child is a minor or, whatever. But we're severely autistic children, and that data is, what we're hearing is just phenomenal about the consciousness and awareness of the young person, that the expression of words or whatever is what's being hindered, but the consciousness is not.
Yes.
So it's pretty fascinating. Also,
go ahead, continue.
I was going to say animals is a great example of, sort of nonverbal communication that can happen with medical intuitives. I work with animals. A lot of my students do. Many medical intuitives do. It's the same process.
It is. Yeah. In fact, that was my other experience with a professional medical intuitive who focused on animals. And my little dog was 15 years old, and she said she just wants you to know that she's getting ready to depart. And it didn't seem as though anything was wrong. She wants you to know to prepare yourself. She's had a really good life. She wants to eat steak and blueberries, and she is going to go in a very simple way that won't drag out. And I thought, I'm not ready. And sure enough, it happened just like that. Had an asthmatic attack a few months later, loved the steak and blueberries. And she was gone in a very short period of time, just some distress with her breathing. She nailed it. It was right on. And it gave me time to really think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's lovely. And, animals are a lot more open. They just have less going on in their
less
energy.
Baggage.
You could say. But there is a lot of value in what you're bringing up, Regina, is a really important point, and that is the applications of medical intuition in hospice care, in with children, with animals, with people who are incapacitated in some way. But what about in research, right? We have medical intuitives who are actively working in research where they are using their intuitive skills to help develop all kinds of things, right? I mean, the applications are really quite profound when you think about it.
They really are. Now, one thing I want to get in is in your book, you have a couple chapters on being able to kind of self-test to identify if you have some of the natural traits that would really help you in your journey to becoming a medical intuitive, if that's something someone chooses to do, either privately for themselves, their families, or professionally. So that's in the book. And also how to do your own medical intuitive processes and go through your body. And I loved your exercises where you go through and you talk to each part of your body and you say hello and you thank it for doing what it's doing. It's really a very sweet process. So those chapters are in the book as well. One of the things that we look at here is the clairs, and each of us has probably a different one of the clairs, clairvoyant, clairsentient, etc., that we have going for us. Most people are naturally intuitive. So maybe are you mostly clairvoyant, or do you have a few of the clairs going? And just go through what the clairs are really quickly so people can start seeing themselves in the story.
Oh, sure. Of course. This is really an important part of the discussion.
Yeah.
What is intuition, right? What does it consist of? Well, there are many, many clairs. The four that I consider probably the most prominent in human experience is claircognizance, which means clear knowing, that I know what I know. I don't know how I know it. I might not have any evidence for it, but I know it, right? That's important. We call those hunches, mother's intuition, women's intuition, which means men can't do it, which is not true at all. Mm-hmm. There's also clairsentience, which means clear feeling. And that means feeling the physical or emotional information of other people. And a lot of healthcare workers are very clairsentient, meaning empathic. So they kind of soak in everybody's material. It can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
Clairaudience means clear hearing. That is a really interesting skill. Hearing information without the use of your physical ears. People call that what? Inner guidance, inner wisdom, that still small voice you hear in prayer and meditation. We actually have an understanding of what that means. The clair that I use and that I teach most to do what I do is clairvoyance, which means clear seeing. And that word is loaded, Regina. I mean, that word has so much stigma attached to it. It's ridiculous, but all it means is that I can get a visual look at the body and the biofield and the history of life history. And that's really useful to see all the detail there.
That's excellent. And I'm personally, I use a few of those. Mm-hmm. In the past, I've had some fun just kind of playing with looking inside people's bodies a bit. And it's really absolutely fascinating the ways in which the information comes. Nothing to the degree that you do, because you see into minute detail. But what I'm saying is, I think most anybody can do this if they decide this is something they're absolutely fascinated with and wish to do. Wouldn't you say?
Yes. And I'll tell you why. Intuition is hardwired into humans. We have it. We're born with it. Everybody's born with it. Whether or not it's thwarted or discouraged in life when you're young makes a big difference about your thoughts on whether or not you can develop it. But anyone can develop their intuition of any kind, as they choose. How I think about this is that if you wanted to do something you've never done before and you're not sure you can do it, like speak a new language, for example, or learn to play an instrument that you've never played before, what people normally do? They normally say, well, I'm going to put myself in an educational environment. I'm going to learn from a good instructor. I'm going to practice. And, I'll get to be able to do what I want to do, right? Speak Italian or something. We don't think about intuition that way because it's so stigmatized in our societies, because there's so much superstition and misconception about it. But that is literally the way we learn, right? That's a learning environment. So can we learn it? Of course we can learn it. Can anyone do it? Yes, if they choose to develop it. In my programs, just to make a distinction, the main programs, the medical intuitive training is for wellness professionals, because my feeling is this is where it belongs, ethically and responsibly and with the most effectiveness. Teach those folks who are already in that field or who want to be in that field. For all of the rest, everybody else, we need to establish that mind-body connection for ourselves. So we're not second-guessing ourselves, so that we're getting good, clear information from our own biofields and bodies, so that we can impart that to our healthcare professional and say, I think it's this, or why don't we look at that? my liver said this. My big toe wants that. These are great tools to have to take charge of your own health and wellness. And for that, there are many tools for that. The book has resources. The website has guided meditations. And I teach a workshop called Medical Intuition for Healing. And that is where you learn how to establish that connection.
So I would like to find out now, how do you see the future of all of this? How do you see this playing out? What's it going to take before the conversation we're having right now becomes an everyday reality, where every family, every person can work with a medical intuitive and have the doctor open and receptive and the system itself open and receptive to that?
Oh, gosh. Crystal ball time, right?
Yeah. Intuitive.
Well, we're working towards that. That's the key, is that we're working towards that. And that's what we want. That's what Nomi wants. That's what I want personally as a medical intuitive. We want it to be accessible to all members of the public. We want the medical field to acknowledge it, to be really upfront. We want medical intuitives as members of the healthcare team. That's what we want. And what was exciting about writing the book in terms of the future is that I was able to interview several doctors who work directly with medical intuitives, how they do it. So we have a model now, and what that means for them. I also interviewed wonderful people who have been at the forefront of this field for decades. Dr. Larry Dossie, Dr. Gladys McGarry. These people are pioneers, and all of them say without the intuitive element, without medical intuition, medicine will never advance. That's their opinion. I couldn't
agree more.
Yeah, I would agree also. And so now what we need is a way forward. So Nomi and myself and other colleagues were looking for that. We know that there are doctors and physicians, I should say, who are interested. We know this. One thing that's happening is a study that I'm working on to bring doctors and medical intuitives together with the patient, which is one of the models that's shown in the book. And we want to see how that works. So we're trying to get a sense of how this will actually work in real time, right? So that people know that they have an option. They can ask their doctor, hey, let's bring in the medical intuitive, or the doctor can say, let's do that now. Or the doctor is a medical intuitive and can talk about it openly, and there are many out there that would like to do that. Yeah.
And I see this as, at this time in history, I don't think there's been a better time. Because of the failure of the mechanistic way of viewing the body in the past, and the desire on the part of everyone to do better, including most of the people in the medical industry, I don't think there's a better time to really consider it. If you're a person who is kind of compassionate by nature, sensitive and intuitive by nature, as a career path, I mean, gosh, seems to me that should be way at the top of the list of what's needed in the world. But then I'm putting my own prejudices in all this, because that's what I see as being needed. It's the same with piecing together our deep history as humans. We're getting it through interesting findings by astronomers, archaeoastronomers, archaeologists, and intuitives who are going into the past. And by working together, we can start seeing who we are as a species. Well, definitely the same thing applies to the human body.
Oh, without question. Without question.
Wendie, this has been absolutely wonderful. I'm so supportive of what you do and everybody that does this. And any final thoughts before we sign off? Anything we haven't gotten to?
No, I think we've covered it, but people can always go to the website at thepracticalpath.com. There's tons of information about the study, about what medical intuition is, how you can find out more, and you can always reach me through the contact form, or anyway. Happy to answer any questions. I still do see clients, so I'm happy to take that as well. We're available.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that, because I am planning on going to your portal, because I want to develop a relationship with you, or one of the people you've trained myself. It's been a long time, and I feel everything I've said, I personally believe it's time that we start having these relationships as regular relationships, not just something you do once in a while. So anyway, I'm going to your portal to sign up. So you're going to have a nice challenge with me, Wendie.
I look forward to it, Regina, and I I really appreciate your kind words about the book. You know, it was designed for not only the medical establishment, but also everyday folks to learn about this skill, to learn more about it and find out what it can offer.
Yes, absolutely. So everybody, thank you again, Wendie. And everybody, you can go to thepracticalpath.com, learn about all of it, pick up a copy of the book, everything that Wendie just talked about a moment ago. And I wish you good luck on your journey with medical intuition. I'll be there with you. So until next time, thank you for joining us here on reginameredith.com. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you might also want to consider joining Patreon, which allows me to keep all of this content free and available to everyone. And if you're looking for like-minded souls, you might also enjoy my online community called Our Neighborhood. Links to join are in the description.